Greetings! Out here cruising along some empty desert landscapes in southeast Oregon. When you're out here on the road with nothing to do and no one to talk to, there's not a whole lot to do other than think. Try to fill your head with something other than boredom. It can get pretty boring out here by yourself on these empty roads. And that's why it really helps to be interested in sightseeing and looking at these desert landscapes. I particularly love desert landscapes. I love being able to see so far, way out into the distance. You can see every nook and cranny and sort of exposed area. You know, you pass by a lot of periods of telephone poles too. They go on for miles, but like for example, just we come over this ridge here, oh gosh, there's just nothing out there in front of me, and what you're seeing out to the side, oh, there's some cows. Mostly cattle country. A few cars pass by here and there, but as we come around this corner here, actually open out onto some, a whole lot of nothing. But like for example, you can see here these layers being exposed. You wouldn't be able to see that if it was just covered in trees. That's pretty cool. Well, the road actually turns. I mean, there's very few trees to be seen. That is some wide open landscapes. I love the way it just sort of, the land sweeps away. Another benefit too is these long straight roads with the speed limit being 65, you can really make time. It's nice to be able to go 65, and as I've said before during a talk and drive, have no ants be able to keep up with me. They may be able to skitter along pretty quickly, but they can't go 65. And now we're down here on the valley floor, and you can really start to see the layers, the rocks that have been laid down over and over. I presume that's basalt. Volcanic eruptions year after year after year. The Columbia basalts and the basalts of Oregon are fascinating geological history. These vertical sort of fissures formed in the crust of the earth that allowed magma to shoot up into it, and all this lava spilled out across the landscapes, and it happened for thousands and millions of years. And depending on where you are in Oregon, you can be seeing these layers of basalt. You could be looking back, 8 or 7 or sometimes even 10 or 14 million years into the past. If you'll recall some of my adventures on the lower John Day River, you can see the basalt layers in those river canyons. And the lowest layers that you can see are somewhere around 7 million years ago. And it's the highest layers, I'm mistaken, are about 7 million years ago, and they go back 14 million years, so you're looking at about a 7 million year span of time just in that, 800 to 1,000 feet of river canyon. And so who knows how many millions of years we're looking back in time here. When you consider some of the earliest history you can sort of find archaeologically for human habitation here in Oregon goes back maybe 15,000 years. We know there had to be people sooner, but proving it in the archaeological evidence, that's not always easy to do. I'm getting up to the intersection here. But for example, at Fort Rock, we've got archaeological evidence going back 10,000 years. The Klamath tribe, you see evidence for them going back somewhere around 15,000 years, and that's generally the accepted sort of timeline of human habitation in North America. But I remember reading a study not too long ago where they found archaeological evidence in Canada that dated back 35,000 years. You're kind of going, so between 35,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago, here we are at Highway 78. You can see here's our signs telling us where we're gonna go. Let's head down to Burns Junction, 27 miles, and it's a long, straight, nothing road. Oh my goodness. Nothing out here. Whole lot of nothing. But so we've got these fascinating bits of archaeology that take us back a little longer than we may realize. And if you think about some of the Neanderthal evidence that we have of the things that they would make or do, such as art, little quarry, there is Neanderthal sort of constructions going back 175,000 years. You know, they found in these caves that they basically took stalactites and stalagmites and broke them off and laid them out in sort of patterns or like hearths. And this is inside of a cave where you would have been in pitch darkness, so they had to have been able to master torches and fire and understand the underground world a little better than we may think. That's very, very fascinating. You know, 175,000 years ago, people knew how to do certain things like make fire, how to work with rocks and stones. And, you know, I struggle with the idea that for, 100,000 years plus, humans were perfectly satisfied with, smacking rocks together and, rubbing sticks together and wearing animal skins. Especially when there's ancient archaeological sites showing sophisticated mathematics and understandings of geometry and physics and applied physics and applied geometry, advanced mathematics like calculus in what should have been tribal situations where people were basically, hunter-gatherers, and yet they understood calculus. They understood how to work with large stones and how to move them and how to stack them up appropriately and engineer their monumental constructions. That's thousands and thousands of years ago in places where they should have been, living in, huts and using vines and spearing fish off of, canoes. And yet they somehow understood how to move massive blocks of stone that today we can't even do using what we presume to be their native methods. So the timeline of humanity, especially when you've got these open landscapes like this where nobody's really done the hardcore archaeology and geology, trying to find that evidence of who was here before us. Mainly they just looked at this and went, let's graze some cows. Most landowners don't want to find an archaeological site on their property because often that means it has to be sort of set aside by the government and, preserved, and that means they can't use that part of their land anymore. And obviously, if you've ever lived in rural areas, including places like in Oregon, you'll probably know that when people find those sorts of sites, they hide them, they refuse to tell people about them, they don't mention that they have it on their property. They don't want the government to be stepping into their property and saying, this part of your land is now ours because of the archaeological, evidence that's important we preserve. And, the landowner just wants their land. They're not necessarily that worried about preserving the archaeology. Not to say every landowner is like that. There are many landowners who are very proud to have those artifacts and sites preserved on their property, and they protect them, making sure that nobody can just, it's not open to the public to go trample and trash and raid for their little trinket to take home and put on their shelf to collect dust. And we need more landowners like that, people who are, trying to walk more of a balance instead of, I do whatever I want with my land and the government and no one else can tell me any different, or, preserve it and no development whatsoever. There needs to be somewhat of a balance, obviously. We're actually going up the hill. And when you've got such open, empty landscapes like this, it's kind of hard to side with someone's greed about their land when they have 100,000 acres and we'd like to preserve, a quarter acre where there's a Native American village site from 15,000 years ago. I don't see why that should be such a problem as long as it's not one of those, this is no longer your land, this belongs to the government. We need to find that right balance. So it's interesting sort of being out here. Come on, little truck, get up the hill. Being out here in these open landscapes and sort of considering what used to be and what is now and trying to find, the meeting between the two. A little four-cylinder does not like being up at these high desert locations and thinner air and a load on it. Oh, look at out there. There's just nothing. A whole lot of nothing. Camber of the road. It's a little bit of the problem of doing video this way. I can't be holding the camera because it's not very safe. But the camber of the road sometimes aims you right at the sky. And if I aim it too far down, you're kind of just staring half the frame at the road and what's going by really quickly. You can't really see it, so try to take you along. But sometimes you're out in the desert, there's nothing to see but that. What you're looking at right now is just a hill and sky, and that's it. It's a kind of a grayish, half cloudy, half smoky day. It's kind of ugly today. Not a very pretty day. But it's the desert, so, you know, what are you missing? Big, open, sweeping landscapes, the whole lot of nothing. The occasional passing semi. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and shut off the camera for now, but I want to thank you for joining me for a few miles of empty, boring desert landscapes to kill some time out here on the road in Southeast Oregon.